I'll do both, I think. Right, I think it's easier if I also do it on the group and send it, and then
That's fine, however it is.
yeah.
I
Okay, so
told
let
them
me
it'll be
just,
your time anyway.
so I'm just gonna put it on now, so we have it. Oh, no. Okay, thank you. Okay, so, oh wait, I didn't do that properly.
Oh, June is interesting.
Okay.
Would you
What?
like to hear today's?
Okay, great. Okay, so we have a lot to talk about today, and oh no, where are my notes? Uh-oh. Wait, my God. Okay, so we're going to talk about the parsha. It's a double parsha, and we're going to talk about Yom Ha'atzmaut a little bit, and maybe even we'll talk a little bit about Sfirat Hamim. Let's see how much time, how we manage our time. Okay, yeah. That's a lot of stuff. Sierra, I think it's 17 days. It's 17 today or 18 already? It's 18 already. Sorry, 18.
Check it off
It's 18.
on my fridge.
Yeah.
So
I counted so late at night last night that I'm. Anyway,
Shabbos is my hardest. I can still say,
because it's you don't.
I get reminders on my phone, so I remember, and I just donate on Shabbos, it's like I have to, and so many times I get out of bed to go get it.
To go get it. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so let's start with parsha. So it's a double parsha, like I said, it's a Achrei Mot Kedoshim.
So now it's going to constantly be
Achrei Mot Kedoshim is double. Emo, I think, is not double, and I think Bahar B'Chotai might
also
be double again. I think I didn't check, but Bahar B'Chotai could be double. Emo is not usually connected to the parsha, and Bahar B'Chotai are. If we need to connect, they would be something we would connect.
Okay.
Okay, and then I think we're done with doubles. I don't think, or no, maybe also Matok Masay could be double. Anyway, there's certain parts they double and others they don't. They don't double this anyway. So this week's parsha starts with Avodat Yom Kippurim, with the korbanot of the Kohen. Right, we're not going to go into the details, but like what would be done on Yom Kippur, and then wait, let me just open it up so it's in front of me. So like I said, it starts with so Avodat Yom Kippur and all the details, like the Sir Lazazel. Like, we're not going to go into that today. The next thing the parsha talks about, and that's pretty much the whole of Perek Yud Zayin. Perek Yud Zayin talks about something called Shchutei Chutz and Kisui Adam. So I'm just going to say a couple words about this. It's not our focus. Shchutei Chutz and Kisui Adam, the idea was that originally, every time a person was going to eat meat, they would have to come to the Mishkan. And every time people eat meat, there was some level of being kind of like a korban. Now, already in the Torah, you know how a lot of times there's like the layer of the Torah and then later Chazal say other things. So already in the Torah, it talks about how when we come to Eretz Yisrael, there's not going to be practically plausible, like it doesn't work to come to the Mishkan every time I want to eat meat. And Hashem is open to this, but he still, I think the statement is still that we have to understand that our sustenance, and especially our sustenance in meat, in a minute I'll talk about the difference about meat and other things, it somehow has some connection to our Avodat Hashem. It's not disconnected. I think that's part of what we're saying. And one of the things that came from this is Kisui Hadam, that the second half of this parak is talking about Kisui Hadam, how if a person shechts an animal, they have to cover the blood of the animal. And the Torah doesn't look at eating meat lightly. So we're allowed to eat meat, but it's not just like it's not just like picking a flower, which also we can't do anymore, but it's something serious, it's something weighty, and the life of an animal is something that we can take, but it has to be with in the proper context, it has to have like the proper balance. We had a guest over a few weeks ago who's from India, and he was saying that there's certain Indian, someone who was in China, and he says certain Tibetan tribes, they like only eat a certain amount of meat, and they only eat the meat of animals that they like bonded with and connected with. So it reminded me of what we were talking about here about the Baines sheep that they would like raise and name and whatever, that like you respect the life of this animal and you understand that the balance, the celestial balance includes the fact that different animals eat the meat of other animals, but like you don't take it lightly. Like you see it as something that you do with respect. I always, my rabbi, so he tells us the story of how when one of his sisters got married, his kid married into a family that was very Haredi, and they had all these discussions about kashrut at the wedding. It was very complicated, this kashrut. At the end, he said, I'll shecht the animals for the wedding, because he's also a shochet. So he said, I'll go shecht, and they couldn't say no to that, because right, how could you say, I don't trust your shechita, right? So he went to and legally, it was complicated to shecht in his home, so he went to do it at the mashchita. So he went to the mashchita to shecht his cow, 2 cows, or I don't know how many cows he shechted, I think 2. And the first one, he strokes it and he talks to it, like he has this whole ceremony he goes through before he shechts the cow. And then the mashgiach just he couldn't handle it. And the second one, the mashgiach's move away, and the mashgiach just did it. But he was talking about how he feels like part of if you're going to say we can eat meat, it includes this respect for the animal, this understanding that it's something that's not to be taken lightly. So Rav Kook, at the end of the day, says we're going towards not eating meat. That's Rav Kook. Rav Kook says that the ideal is eventually not to eat. He talks a lot about respect for every living being, and he says that today we're not ready not to eat meat because we haven't come to the level of respect between people yet. Like he says that if we skip stages, he says skipping stages is not a healthy thing, and to respect animals more than respect people is not okay. So Rav Kook was semi-vegetarian. He ate meat on Shabbat, right, but only on Shabbat. And I think he just ate a kazai. Like I think he just, was yotze, but during the week he didn't eat meat. And it's based on what we're talking about here, about the idea that there's some level, whatever, there are different ways of taking it. But anyway, I just think that that's part of what this Parshia is talking about. And it's interesting that people like the Tanakh, experts compare a lot of the wording here to the wording in Parashat Noach of when we were first allowed to eat meat. Mm-hmm. And there it talks about how you're not allowed to kill people, but you are allowed to kill animals, but only in a certain context. And there's a lot of wording. We're not going to do it now, but like if we were a textual class, it was like on the board and anyway, but there's a lot of interesting comparisons. Okay, that's now the next Parshia talks about I'm going to say it talks about Chukot HaGoyim, but the main focus is arayot, meaning relationships that are not okay. But it's in the context of K'maseh Eretz Mitzrayim asher shavtem ba lo tasu, meaning we cannot have relationships with siblings, parents, whatever, the whole list, because it's not okay, but don't do it like the other nations did. Other nations, apparently this was more accepted. And here there's the whole list of the arayot, including the nidah. And the end of this Parshia says that if we do this, the taki haaretz. Okay, so there's an assumption that there are certain sins that the land cannot stomach. And it just vomits us out if we don't keep some of these mitzvot. We're not going to go into politics here, but there's a lot to be said for when there are all kinds of ways that the land kind of hints to us that something's wrong. And one of them is people leaving or not leaving or talking about leaving. But I'm not saying anything about any specific. I'm just saying in general. Now I realize what I said sounds a certain way. I didn't mean that at all. I just feel like that in general, looking at things that happen in our country, it tells us something. Our land is a living being. It's not just earth. And it's funny, when I tried to decide what piece to bring today, the one I didn't bring that I thought I'd bring, Rav Kook has a really beautiful piece about how Am Yisrael and the land are so it's like an organic being. Like we're not separate. It's not like we just live here. We're like it's part of who we are, part of who the land is. Anyway, I didn't mean to say what it sounded like I was saying. Sorry.
No, but we do. We have to be mindful. We have to realize.
We all have to be mindful, but it sounded like I was saying something about somebody else, I think, and I really didn't mean to say anything about anybody else. I'm talking about us being mindful and listening. Right. Yeah. I'm gonna.
That's what we thought.
Good. Okay. So then we go into Parashat Kedushim, And Parashat Kedoshim is one of the places where we have the most mitzvot in the Torah, right? So if you talk about a mitzvah and you want to know where it appears, chances are it's either in Kitzei or Kedoshim, right? There are a couple other places to help, but also here is one of the places. It might even be the most. I don't remember exactly. Mishpatim also has a lot of mitzvot. But Parashat Kedoshim has a lot of mitzvot. It's not so organized, and I'm going to try to like talk a little bit about the order, but I don't feel like I have clarity on like this is how it's set up. But we will talk about, our focus will be one of the mitzvot. We'll talk a little bit about some of the others. The first,
I ask you, do they fall into this part of Kedoshim because it causes more Kedusha?
okay, so what you're asking is a really interesting question, and the word Kedoshim means separate, literally means separate, okay? And we've connected it to Kedusha, meaning connecting to Hashem, because Hashem, we also say is Kadosh, and part of what we mean is we say he's exalted in the context of separate, right? Hashem is separate, even though we want to say he's very much connected to the world, but part of what Hashem is that there's something like, right? So part of being Kadosh is separating yourself off of certain things and connecting to Hashem. Now, in modern day Hebrew, Kadosh means something different than it did in Tanakh. That's why it's important, I think, to define it. And I had this year in the first semester in the seminary I work at, so there was a topic we were talking about, and the Rav kept saying Kedusha, and as someone I realized he didn't mean what the girls thought he meant, meaning he was talking about Kedusha as being like an extra layer of like being like holier, like to an extent that not everybody has to do that. And they thought, what are you talking about? We don't have to be Kadosh, like don't we want to be holy or in a holy nation? So I feel like part of the discussion is what is Kedoshim talking about? Okay, so both Rashi and Ramban talk about how Kedoshim to you means Kedoshim to you, to be somewhat separate from certain things. One of the things we have to be separate from is the relationships that we're going to talk about, it comes up in Parashat Achremot and Kedoshim, the Yasul relationships, and that's like one of the basic things Rashi says, that whenever we talk about Arayot, we also talk about Kedusha, because part of what keeps our nation holy is the way we structure our relationships. So we have relationships with and who we don't, and following the rules of Jewish marital relationship. But it's more than that. It's also living a lifestyle that Hashem puts forth for us. And I think what's fascinating is that there's everything here. There's Ben Adam leMakom, there's Ben Adam leChavero. There's actually a lot of Ben Adam leChavero. And I think it's important that part of being a good Jew, a big part of being a good Jew, is being a human being and being said tzodek, not as in right, but as being righteous, like doing the right thing. And a lot of this parsha talks about caring for the needy, right, which includes the ger and the poor and right, everybody who is not, everybody who is not in a great situation. That's a very big part of this parsha, and also having a proper judicial system that is honest and we're getting so close. I know, I'm sorry, but that's part of what it's about. Ifa ve'ifa and tzedek and being honest. And
when you're talking about relationships today, I'm not being judgmental. It's so accepted, the LGBT, whatever it is, BT, and it's become part of the norm. And I understand. I mean, I've read a lot about gays and I understand that they can't, that's them. So, but it again, it's it's asur. It's such, but so what does that mean today for us when it's being so accepted and understood, and yet, and it's in almost every family, I hear.
Well, how do we deal with that?
How do we deal with that?
Okay, so I'll say a few words. I'll try to be very careful. This is my opinion, and there are many opinions, but I think there are a few elements to this discussion. Okay, I think one of the elements in the discussion is that once something becomes normal, it also becomes much more common. And I think that today, because it's accepted, I think there's a very wide range of people who have a situation that's very clear cut. People have situations that are less clear cut. And I think that because it's been normalized, then I'll just share, I don't know if you've heard, do you know who Matt Walsh is? No, okay. So if you're interested in this topic, some people are very troubled by this, but there's a movie he put out, I don't know when exactly, but a while ago, called What is a Woman? And part of what he puts out there is the extreme, the word woke is, yes, no, woke, no, yeah. So woke is like the word that's used for this openness that's very much promoted today. It's like the kind of new language that we're supposed to be. So that's called woke in certain circles. So he is speaking against woke. But part of what he shows there is the extreme to which we've gotten. And he interviews a pediatrician who says when a child is born, we don't know if it's a male or female. We wait and see, and we let them decide. Now, I understand where she's coming from, but I think this is the extreme. Okay, so obviously there's many, many different parts of reality, but I think it's important to remember this. That's one piece. Okay, and this is doesn't solve anything, but I think it's important to have that in our mind. Now, I also know people who are gay and their situation is real and they're not making it up. And I'm not saying what I'm saying is true of everybody at all. I just think it's important to realize that there's a very wide range of reality. Like when I meet a friend who tells me that her 3-year-old is gay, I take a deep breath. I don't say anything, but I don't think a 3-year-old can
Doesn't know
be
what
gay.
crayons they really want to play with, and you're making already that decision.
Exactly.
For them. It's ridiculous.
So,
sorry.
but I think we have to be super careful because I think the reality we live in, I have friends who are afraid that their kid is gay at 5 or 6. And it's because the media and the whatever is so overpowering the way some people relate to reality that it affects us all. Anyway, that's one thing. I'm putting that aside for a second.
So how do you,
Well, hold on, I'm coming
okay.
to this, okay? Now, I think that it's also important to remember, and what I'm gonna say now is hard for me to say, but I think it's important to be said, that there are many situations that don't have solutions. And I want to give an example from a different world. I'm meaning I deal with couples that don't have children or do have whatever, they have challenges in the world of fertility. And the first session we had, a woman came and spoke about her story, and she talked about her challenges, and I'm waiting for the happy end, right? And she's telling this long, beautiful, moving story, and at the end of the day, they never had children. They tried everything. And at some point, they took in a foster child who was not young, it was an older child. And I remember for me, that was a really big, it really touched me and it really affected me. I feel like it's important to remember that there are difficult situations with no solutions. So the assumption that every single, there are people that are born without a leg, and it's horrible and it's really painful, and we have to love them and we have to embrace them. But it doesn't mean that we have a solution for every problem. I think that we've lost this, and I feel like we've kind of decided that we have to change the world for every person who has some kind of issue. Now, again, this is very complicated what I'm saying, and I'm saying it with a lot of pain. The fact that the Torah says something's not allowed and it ends up causing pain for someone, it's a reality that's going to be no matter what, because the rule is never going to fit every individual. And I feel like we live in a world where we think the rules were made to accommodate every single individual, and that's not how the world works. And I feel like we've lost a lot of our, I feel like I'm in really murky waters right now, because I feel like I'm speaking against the way our whole generation looks at the world, and I'm saying a totally reverse thing. And I'm saying it even though I feel like it's so important to hear the pain of every single person, but it's also really important to remember that there's a bigger picture. And I'm going to give a totally different example also that I just had in our issue. We just had an evening about Mesilabot get, about women whose husbands aren't giving them a gift.
Oh.
And it's horrible. It is. It's really horrible. However, I feel like we focus so much on the personal story that we want this system to, and I think that it is part of the system. Part of this is the job to accommodate the pain of people, but not necessarily to change the rule to fit the needs of the personal person.
You
Okay.
have to realize though that it makes sense though, because you have to be sensitive and you have to recognize, and also like there's the whole thing now, like can you be religious and still be gay in the community? And they're coming to a point where they're allowing it. On the other hand, we can't change the Torah. And if they want to come to shul and do this, let's say come this week, and then it says that you can't change what's written here. So it becomes a very,
It's
very
very hard.
difficult thing. And it's the looks and the things, and it's how do we really do the same thing with bathrooms. I do not have to go to the bathroom with somebody who's not, because they're struggling.
Right.
And there's so many issues, but it's a sensitivity you still have to have.
But I think we also have to be very sensitive. Like
Mhm.
I would never, try to hurt somebody or I would try to be very
Yes.
careful. And I feel like even what I'm saying is probably hurtful to the people in the situation.
Right.
But I feel like we can't hide the truth or hide the Torah or hide because of the sensitivity of people. On the other hand, we have to be very, very sensitive to the extent that we can be sensitive.
Right.
Now, I do think that there are many practical solutions, and not everybody's happy about them, but there are practical solutions that are right for some of these people. Like, for example, I have a close friend whose husband, he started this project where gay people who are interested come to him, a gay woman with a gay man, and he sets them up with each other. Listen for a
How
second,
does
okay?
this work?
The way it works is like this. They say, this is my sexual tendency, but I really want to be a part of a community. And I prefer to live a normative, halachic religious life to following through with my sexual tendencies. It's a decision they make. They come to him. He doesn't seek them out. And he only does it with people who he feels are 100% gay, meaning sometimes there are people that he feels like maybe can totally have a normative sexual relationship, because sometimes there is a whole range of tendencies, and he only deals with the people who come to him. And he says that some of these people eventually fall in love and have normative relationships. But
Do they also have like an open marriage? I mean, because
I
they're
think
not comfortable with each other.
I think that they're not
sexually.
uncomfortable with each other. They're just not attracted to begin with. And part of what he says, and I think it's very true, is that marriage, the do you love me question, marriage has evolved very, very much over the years. Marriage used to be some kind of, partnership, and often it was a financial agreement. And Baruch Hashem, today marriage is different. But we have to remember that not every marriage today is different. So even though Baruch Hashem, we have many, many amazing, loving marriages, not every marriage is going to be like that. So he says people can make a choice. He says they have to be they have to have all the information. Like he doesn't want to lie to anybody. And in some societies, they might say, you think you're gay, forget it, just get married and you'll get over it. So he doesn't say that. He's not saying that. But he is saying that if you're making a conscious, educated decision, and you say, I know that this is not perfect, but life isn't perfect, and this is better than the alternative. That's the choice they can make. And I think it's a valid choice, and I think that he saves a lot of lives. And some of these couples end up having children and having somewhat normative lives. And again, as long as it's open and honest and they're both aware, I think that that's a really big deal. I mean, so many of us have so many urges that we don't act on, right? I mean, there are people, I just feel like a lot of what happened is that we've decided that people's feelings and pain is the most important thing. And when you start there, that's where we end up. But if you start with, yes, emotions and feelings are super important, we take them into account, but there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more. And again, I feel like we have to be sensitive and accommodating and embracing and all those. I really, truly believe that. And whatever, my mother's husband has a son who at some point was decided that he's gay. And she asked me if I mind if he comes for Shabbat. And I said, of course not, he's part of the family. And I will never say a word to hurt him or to, would I like him to speak about it openly in the presence of my children? No. But if he does, I'll deal, I'll
Does he
handle
come
it.
with his partner?
So now he has a female partner. So I don't know,
Female.
No, it's, I know many couples that have announced that I know all kinds of, we have friends whose daughter was married and got divorced because she discovered that she was, that she was a lesbian, And then now she's married again, and now she's happy, and she has children, and everything's fine. And I mean, I was actually fine, but I just feel like the world is much more complicated than we make it out to be, I think. And I feel like sometimes extreme liberalism is not more open or complex than, whatever. I'm going to put this aside, but I think I said enough. I'm afraid I'm going to say
Discriminate yourself.
Yeah, was that at all
It's
helpful?
complicated.
It's so complicated. And I think even just respecting the fact that it's so complicated is
It's just that, like it is so accepted today, even in our world, okay?
We're the minority. Yeah. That's how I feel.
What?
we're the minority. Please watch What Is a Woman? Let me know what you thought. Okay,
I'm gonna
watch it.
But can I
It's-
just say
Oh,
one
what is
thing?
it called?
It's called What Is a Woman? Matt
So
Walsh.
Can I tell you that
It's
I
funny. It's
think-
a little extreme, but it's interesting.
I think that the one thing though that we can learn from this, and it's the same with any mitzvah that you struggle with. Some people feel like they have a hard time with the brit nida. And the biggest thing we can do with all these mitzvot that we struggle is you can learn more. Now today, when Hashem gave us this whole thing about men and women being together, it was written such a long time ago, and the Rebbeim today have to figure out how we can make this, that we can be sensitive to each other. Not that we should change things, not that we should say that this is that and this is not, you can't change, but how do we take it into today's world and make it work for us so that we are more, that we're still human beings. It's hard, it's hard.
I also just think it's really important to remember that often the reality we live in feels like it's totally 100% set in stone. And people believed what it says in the Torah for thousands of years. Like the idea that we look at it otherwise, I mean, yes, in Greece, it was different, but like the way this whole woke movement is so young. And I think a little bit of humility, like to understand that we have this new vision of the world and it's suddenly the only truth. Like take a deep breath, take a step back. And I think this also is something that comes up a lot in this parsha, and I was actually going to say it anyway, so I'll say it now. It's interesting that in between all of these mitzvot, there are a lot of like sudden references to your parents or to V'adarta Pnei Zaken. And it seems a little bit out of context. And I feel like part of what the Torah is hinting to us is, remember that you're the new kid on the block. There have been a few generations before you. And the fact that right now this Torah doesn't sit well with me today in 2023 doesn't mean that it's not true, because a lot of these things that are suddenly suddenly questions have been very, very much accepted for many, 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 many years. And the notion that like today we know better than anybody else knew ever for forever and ever and ever. Again, there are things that I think every generation has its new ideas that are truth. But I think often a new generation has a vision, and there's some element of truth in it, but often when it first comes out, it's going to be extreme and not perfect. And I really, really hope that like what's going on today, hopefully we'll manage to like root out between the truth elements. There's a lot of truth. The idea that we have to be accepting of every human being is, I think, very true. I think the element of redefining reality, redefining normal because of every personal human being, I think is not so true. Like, I think, again, this idea, I really see a lot of today's issue as being a problem between klal and prat, between relating to the big picture and personal stories. Like, I think that's one of our biggest issues today on many levels. Like zchuyot prat, right? The person is very, very central. And I think we've lost right? We've lost vision of the big picture. I think it's a really big piece of this topic and of many, many topics today. But anyway, I can go on forever. I'm going to come back.
Sorry to go
No,
get
don't
off.
apologize. It's important.
No, this is probably one of the things today's generation that stands out.
It is. It's a really
Today's
big
generation was born into the middle of a movie. We go back a little bit further, so we're more.
We go back a little bit further, but we just have
We
a
also
little
have ours, yeah.
slice of picture. And realizing we just have a slice of the picture, I think, is an important realization. I think, again, kibud avayim is part of what it's about, Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about a couple of specific mitzvot, but first I said I would give a structure, right? Okay, let's do this. Okay, so the first piece, I'm dividing, even though it's not clearly divided, but I'm making divisions. The first 8 psukim, I don't really have so much to say about how to define what the topic is, because I feel like it's really a collection of different mitzvot that I don't have rhyme and reason to connect them, but I do want to comment on a couple mitzvot. So one of them is, it says Ishibo imo aviv tirau. So we have to be would be in awe of our parents, which is interesting. It's different than kibud avaim, right? It's mora avaim. And it's interesting that halachically, our relationship with our parents has two components, right? Kavod and mora. And what we usually call kibud avaim is actually mora avaim. Okay, so usually when we talk about relating to our parents, we talk about not calling them by name and standing up or not sitting in their space or whatever. All those things are actually mora avaim, which is what's in this week's parsha. And kibud avaim is really feeding and taking care of them in their old age, halachically.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? And it's interesting. I just heard an idea today that I never heard before, and I thought was really interesting and beautiful. That that usually I always thought of kavod and mora as being kind of like a chesed and gvura balance, right? How like yirah is like some kind of distance and respect or whatever, and the kavod was lehanik, was like to give them. So I always thought that was a more chesed kind of motion. But Arav Dov, someone just quoted him today and told me, and I just think it makes a lot of sense. He said, kavod isn't chesed. Chesed would be ahava. It doesn't say love your parents. It says kavod. Kavod is also some kind of awe. And I was thinking that I think part of what kavod is the idea we're just talking about, is understanding that your parents, they came before you, they know a little more than you do. And kavod, part of what kavod is about is really, there's somebody above you. And there are a lot of ideas about how our relationship to our parents, it connects to our relationship to Hashem. And the Torah a lot of times connects it to, so here it says, Ish imo v'aviv tirau v'shabtotai tishmaru ani Hashem Elokechem, right? Ani Hashem, it's often connected to Ani Hashem. And I think part of the idea behind Kibud Av V'em is understanding that the person through which I came to the world is, I have a lot to thank them for, whether I agree with them, I don't agree with them. Right? They are, kind of, sort of, on some level, my creator, my source, whatever. And it is supposed to be like a stepping stone to our relationship to our creator. And I, again, in the context of what I just said, and they have a little bit of a bigger vision than I do, because they also just have a slice, but their slice maybe is a little bit broader than my slice. Anyway.
I'm glad you brought this up, because one of the reasons I'm going in is the baby person is a Holocaust survivor. But every time I say I'm coming in, it's like, no, you don't have to worry about me. And I just say, no.
That's kibud of it.
I'm saying, but I want to show I do, and this is kibud.
Yes, it is.
My obligation.
Yeah, thank you. I just, two more words about kibud. The word kavod in Kabbalah is connected to keter. Keter is a very, very high sphira. And I think, again, it's connected to this idea of like remembering where things come from. Remembering, like we talk about having Hashem, kavod Hashem, right? Kavod is a word that relates to this like higher, anyway. I want to skip a little bit, but I wanted to say, so the next piece, Psukim Tet Ad Yudchet, is mostly related to caring for the poor and having an honest, proper court system, right? So it talks about those are the mitzvot of like when I have a field, I have to like leave some of it for the poor, and it talks about lo tiknevu, lo tikachashu, and lo tishavu. This is things that have to do with the court system. Lo tikalel cheresh. It's relating to the people who are. I'm sorry, the court system is the next piece. No, also lo tasu avel b'mishpat. Anyway, also in the court system you shouldn't prefer anybody. Okay, so that's until pasuk kaf bet. The next little section is pasuk kaf gimel until pasuk lamed bet, which is, I'm going to call it chukot hagoy, even though it starts with orla and it ends with v'adarta pnei zaken, which seem kind of unrelated. And I'm going to suggest, and this is just my suggestion, that again orla and v'adarta pnei zaken are related to what I was talking about realizing that we don't know everything, and that we, right? So we start out with Orla, which I'm doing a little bit of a drasha here with Orla, but part of what Orla is about is that you don't eat the first 3 years of the tree, and you wait for it to age a little bit, and it has to do with not rushing into things and respecting time. Anyway, I'm doing a little bit of drasha, but I think that V'adarta pnei zaken is very much what I'm saying. That why is V'adarta pnei zaken here in the context of Chukot HaGoyim is if you get up and you say, hey, look, that's cool what they're doing, and my community is like not up to par, they're not updated. And I'm saying, and you know what? Part of not accepting Chukot HaGoyim, not going with the flow with all the new, whatever agenda is also realizing that you have skinim, they know what they're talking about. Please follow your skinim, and right, and also okay. The next piece is really very much connected to what I said about tzedek b'mishpat, ifa moznei tzedek, not having the scale not being tilted wrong, and it also talks about the ger and loving the ger. The ger obviously is the convert, and a lot of people today talk about how the ger is anybody who is without family. I like to say that Baalei Tshuva or Olim Chodashim are also, I think, today's ger. That to care for the people, because the main issue with the ger is they didn't have a support system, and I think that v'ahavta et ger is a big part. It's any person who is not doesn't have a support system. Obviously, also the convert, right? I'm not saying not
foreign, somebody who's foreign in any
somebody,
way.
right? So the ger is an extreme case because they really left their home and they made a choice to do in our nation. But I think Aliyah is totally that today. And I think Baalei Tshuva also, I think anybody who is on their own, doesn't really have a support system, I really think falls into the category of the ger. Even though the ger is a fascinating topic, I'm moving on. Then the next piece is back to Chukot HaGoyim. What do we not do? Molech. We don't do Avot Yidunim, which is all these like magic, soothsaying kind of things. And then again, we say not to curse your parents and your parents. And I think again, this is in the context of Avodah Zarah, some kind of level of saying, I don't care what my parents say. I'm doing my own thing. And then we have the list of arayot again. I'm not going to go into the difference. And then again, at the end, the parsha ends with V'lo takia haaretz etzbeinu. Okay. What I want to do now, even though we don't have so much time left, is I want to go back to the pasuk that I kind of skipped inside the whole. Oh, I skipped one section, but whatever, it doesn't matter. We're going to do. I want to read a couple of psukim with you because we're going to talk about v'ahavta next. So I want to read from pasuk Perek Yutet pasuk Tetzayin. Okay, and it starts like this. Lo telech achil ba'anecha. So you should not be a gossip. And I love how it says lo telech achil. It's like some Rashi says like selling your wares. Like don't walk around sharing all your gossip. Lo tamad adam re'echa ani Hashem. Do not lo tamad adam re'echa means that if you see that someone is in danger, you cannot stand aside and just let it happen. You have to get involved. And I always love to say how Rav Hanan Porat, when he was in the Knesset, his legacy to us was chok lo tamad adam re'echa. He made it into a law, this idea that if you see somebody in danger, you can't just walk away. So people can be punished by law. If they see someone they could have helped, and the reason he did it was because there was a time during the first Intifada that journalists would see a pigua, and instead of calling the police or the army, they just write an article. And he said, this can't be. So he made it a law that if they don't do something actually helpful, then they can be prosecuted. But I think it's a general beautiful law that okay, lo tisna et achicha bilvavcha. You should not hate your brother in your heart. And you should tell them. And then it says you will not carry of sin or burden him with sin. I'm going to explain in a second. You should not revenge, but also you should not feel, right? The titor is like carrying a grudge without actually practically enacting revenge. So I think it's really important to see about that in the context here. And it's not so simple. It's not just this like fluffy love everybody. It's saying, you know what? It's not easy to love your fellow Jews. Sometimes you feel like you hate them in your heart. And then what do? It says, now, I think that totally got a bad rap because usually we say no. But I think really what means is if you have a person that you're feeling very negative towards, if you can, you should try to think of a way to open it up. Now, it's not always easy and it's not always done properly. But if you can't do it properly, then that would be the solution for the anger we have in our hearts.
I think it's nice though, but I think it's just funny though, if I can interrupt, that these few things have to be told us. Meaning you should know it you should want to like it shouldn't be like a stop, like a commandment. Even the thing not to speak, I understand there's like so many things we just spoke about, not speaking Lashon Hara when it came to Miriam, and then again, and it's like this like following in,
First of all, it never says anywhere not to Lashon Hara. It says Lo tilech achila amecha. It doesn't say in Miriam. Nowhere does it say there that it's Lashon Hara. It's Chazal, but in Mashat it has to say it somewhere. This is where it says it.
I just
Like,
think that
this
these
is
are
it.
obvious things that, you should definitely love the next person. And then afterwards, okay, and then like this, like,
I just feel like it's giving us a structure of how to do it, which I think is really
Got
beautiful.
it.
So let me just finish my structure. It's saying that sometimes you want to love your neighbor, but you don't, right? And something they're doing is really rubbing you the wrong way. And the Torah is giving us a tool of how to do it. And it says, first of all, share. Tell them whatever it is that they're doing, you should open it up. But velo tisa alav chet. So it's interesting, velo tisa alav chet, there are many ways of understanding. One is because if you don't, then he'll have this sin. The other is only if it won't cause them more sin, meaning if you say it in an unhealthy way, that'll just be worse. So there's a pirush that says that's like it's a what's it called? It's like a brake system on like it's a moderator. And lo tikam v'lo titor, don't, if you didn't say it, don't still be angry and don't revenge them, because what we want to reach is and I really think the Torah is trying to tell us that yes, you should love your fellow Jew, but it's not so simple. And I want to learn a little bit of a cook on this. That's the sheet I made for you. I feel like I didn't really do these psukim justice. They're really beautiful, and we just kind of breeze over them. But I want to do a cook, and I don't want to hold you. So the reasons I brought up, first of all, I always love to bring up right before Yom Ha'atzmaut. I feel like it's just the right thing to do. And I wanted to, I thought I might bring the piece about the Aletz, the whatever, which would be relevant to Velo Tekiaretz, but I just felt like this was more urgent. And I'm just going to share that last night, I went to a meeting. There's an organization called Mifgashim. It was founded by 3 guys, right? They got out of the army. It was a Dati, a Chiloni, and a Haredi. And they said, this was a few years ago, they said, we just need to meet more. And they took the army, like you get like whatever the manak after the army, the 3 of them took their manakim and invested it in this organization, this nonprofit organization. That what it does is it brings together the team, Chilonim and Haredim. That's what it does. So last night I went to this session. It was amazing.
Why this is not getting the limelight and everything else. Wow.
It's amazing. And it was so, wow. It was hard, but it was very inspiring. And it's funny, when I was preparing the class, I wasn't even remembering this, but as I was going over the pieces, one of the ones we're going to do together, someone read it last night at the Mifgash. And one of the things that I really came out of there with, the way it was first there was like a big circle, everybody kind of introduced themselves and shared who they are, whatever, why they're here. And then we broke up into small discussion groups, and we were supposed to like talk about whatever we talk about, but the issues that are like, we talked about the issues. And then when we came back into the big group, each person was supposed to represent the opinion of somebody else that they didn't agree with. It was really well done, and it was very touching. And the person in my group that I decided to represent, he was this guy who I totally don't agree with his politics, but he said, I didn't exactly follow the rules because I just represented one idea that he said, but he said that his really strong feeling is, he said, Ani bachur achla, ani mamash, ani ishkati amon b'medina azot. I served here, and I've done a lot. Lama atem mevatrim alai? Like, what happened? Like, lo sofrim oti. He said, like, he feels like right now the government, whatever, he doesn't count, doesn't care about him. And first of all, when he said that, I so much identified with him, because I feel like that's how we felt for the last, I don't know how many years. Like in high school, that's totally how I felt. But whatever. But when he said that, I felt like, oh my gosh, obviously, obviously, no Jew will be left behind. Like, I don't want anybody to feel that way. And this, not me, not anybody else. Like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want them to feel that. And I just like, part of what this mishpash was about was saying, I care what you think. I don't agree with what you think. Let's work it out. but I really care. And even if it drives me up a wall, but I really care. Anyway, it was very, very beautiful. I really recommend if you have the opportunity to go to one of these things. It was.
How do you find that?
So this was a group that somebody put together, and it was in Netiv Alametei, in the Kibbutz Netiv Alametei. And someone just called me and said, "Can you please come?" And I was like, at first I said, "I don't have any time." And then she said, "You should really come." And so I came, but I'm really happy I did. I think the way it works is either you've heard of one and you go, or you organize one. Like I can send you the information and you could say, "Hey, you know, call up the Rekazat Kehillah here. So let's do this," you know? I think it's so important. It was so important. Anyway, so let's learn a little bit of Rav Kook.
What's the name of the organization again?
Nifgashim. Let's meet. We're meeting. That's what it is. Okay. Avat Yisrael. So I'm reading. You see, there's like Perek Daled Avat Yisrael. I'm going to read. We're not going to do all of it, just a little bit. We're going to read from here. Okay. Avat Yisrael. והעבודה על הסנגוריה, על הכלל ועל הפרטים. איננה רק עבודה הרגשית לבדה. So he says, Ahavat Yisrael, right? Loving Am Yisrael, and the avodah, he says, the hard work of sanagoria, of like, the word sanagoria is like advocating, like to understand or to kind of protect the opinions, right? To speak for the opinions of both the klal and the pratim. He says, "Einena rak avodah hergeshit levada." It's not just an emotional thing. It's not just something that happens in my emotions. He says it's a really big deal. It's a thing. You have to study it. And he says v'chokhma amukha urechava. It's a wisdom. It's a thing. I keep saying it's a thing, but it demands thought and effort and research and intelligence. It's not simple. So it's chokhma amukha v'rechava rabat ha'anafim. שכולם צומחים ויונקים מלשד טל אור תורת חסד. And he said all of the branches of this Torah, I can't think of the word, this subject, it's not a good word, but that's whatever. It all comes from the place of chesed, the Torah and the chesed, okay? The next, I'm going to read one more sentence in the next one, and then I want to skip to another piece. He says, but I really recommend you go over some more later. Okay. And then he says, Avat Yisrael hi tolada me'ha'emunah. He says, loving Am Yisrael comes from a place of faith. And he goes on and he says, what the emunah of what? Emunah ba'ora ha'eloki shel Knesset Yisrael. Shehu la sgula atzmit shelo tazuz mimena bechol chalifot hazmanim. So he says that in order to really love Am Yisrael properly, you have to really believe that there's something special here and to want it. And I felt like last night, a lot of people came with a lot of, they were very miyoash. They were like they had no hope. Like they really felt like it's all going down. And I felt like this belief is so important. Like to believe that, yes, we are one. And yes, the core values, there's more we have in common than what separates us. Like it's really connected to Emunah. Approaching Ahavat Yisrael through Emunah is it's different. And it's funny because I came out of the session, my first reaction was very optimistic. And then when I thought about it, like some of the things people said, there's really no way to bridge those gaps. But to remember that I keep thinking of it in the context of family, right? So in a family, so I have siblings who I don't agree with, but it's so much more important to me to be on good terms with them than to voice my opinion. That even if I voice my opinion, I'll be careful, right? If we look at our nation that way, then we have opinions. But if we remember that the togetherness is so much more important than our differences, it just changes the whole picture. So that I feel like is a big piece. So let's read one last piece, and I'm going to read Gimel. Okay? And he says like this. האהבה הגדולה שאנחנו אוהבים את אומתנו, לא תסמא את עינינו מלבקר את מומיה. So he says, we love the nation so much, and the assumption is that sometimes when you love something so much, you're blind to the problems. So he says, our great love for our nation will not blind us to its mumeha, blemishes. אבל הננו מוצאים את עצמיותה גם אחרי הביקורת היותר חופשית נקייה מכל מום. So he says, even though our love for it does not blind us to the blemishes, when we look at it properly, we see that עצמיותה, the core, the real pnimiut, that is not blemished, that is untouched. And he says, גם אחרי הביקורת היותר חופשית נקייה מכל מום. The inner part is נקייה מכל מום. And he says, כולך יפה רעייתי ומום אין בך, יקרות שיר השירים. And when Hashem says to Am Yisrael, כולך יפה רעייתי ומום אין בך, he learns from this that the kulach, the real you, is completely perfect. And I think that part of what he's saying here is that approaching Avat Yisrael, again, back to that emunah place, that if we really believe that we're one and we're from one place and that what we have in common is so much greater than what separates us, then there is hope.
Right.
And I didn't bring the Tanya, but I'm just thinking of the Tanya now, that the Tanya, if you ever want to look it up, it's Tanya Perek Lamed Bet. And if you ever talk to Chabadnik, that's like the central piece in the Tanya, Lev Tanya, the heart of the Tanya. And what he says there is that when you realize that the neshama is the ikar, then we're all one. Like, because all the differences are not in the neshama, it's all in the outer exterior things. And I think Rav Kook is saying something very similar. He doesn't use the word neshama, but he says the atzmiut, the main thing, it's all one and it's all together. And again, when you come from a place of emunah, it's clearer, that understanding. I want to add that I feel like whenever I come to Yom Ha'atzmaut, I always remember the words of Rav Amital, Zichrono Livracha, how he talked about how the nevuah od yishvu zkenim uzkenot berchovot Yerushalayim ve'yeladim berchovotah, that the prophecy is that there'll be elderly people here and children here, and the children will be playing in the streets. And who could have imagined that would be? And he says, this is it. I mean, I don't think we're done, but I think that we have, and we've gone so far, and let's keep going with faith. And I feel like a lot of the people last night were expressing this fear that it's going to be gone, like that there will not be a Medina very soon. And I don't share that fear. Again, I'm an optimist. I don't know why. They said why. I don't know. I'm just an optimist. But I feel like part of Yom Ha'atzmaut is being thankful for what we have. And one of the things that also is very much in my mind for what we have is this week's Parsha with Parashat Tashim. There's so much about caring for people who don't have and having honesty. So even though we have issues in our judicial system, it's not corrupt. I mean, there are certain cases that may be corrupt, but in general, the people here want to do good. The people in our system are trying to create justice. Now, we could disagree about how that justice should be. We could disagree about, but they are trying to create justice here. And I think that's a really amazing thing. And it's not necessarily to be taken for granted. And also, I've been thinking a lot about how Medinat Israel really does care for the miskenim, for the poor. A few months ago, I was reading a tshuva. Rav Nachum Rabinovich writes a tshuva about Maser Ksafim, and someone asks him like what counts and what doesn't count, right? When you want to give Maser money, and he says, and obviously I'm not saying that everybody should just base on this, but he says that the money we give to taxes counts as part of our Maser Ksafim. He says you still should give tzedakah, but he says it counts as Maser money because the money we give to Bituach Leumi, it goes to support poor people. And he says, and I just think about, it's so amazing. We live in a country that our taxes feed the poor. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And I just feel like part of what I really think we need to be doing now is both connecting with the people we disagree with and looking at the good. And that's really my thoughts for this Yom Ha'atzmaut.
I'm not trying to get into South Halacha, but I'm just saying, the reason why I looked at you, I'm just thinking, I always try to be very medactic about giving myself money, but sometimes I'll say to myself, wait, I did give, and if a mistake you didn't, could you just like chocolate, paying taxes?
Yes. I would say, okay. I'm going to say something else. I'm going to say there's a whole machloket if giving Maser money is actually a chiyuv, halachically or not.
Right.
Okay. So I really think it's a very important component in our life to be giving to others. So I don't want to take away tzedakah, and I want to say tzedakah is a chiyuv in general. And there's a chiyuv when somebody asks, there actually is a chiyuv when somebody asks you for money. It's actually kind of complicated to not give them because there's and Baruch Hashem, Chazal say Baruch Hashem, we know that a lot of the aniyim are liars, and that's why we don't necessarily have to give every single person. Like they say, it's a good thing for all of us that the liars are doing us a service, because if I ever don't give, then I can say I wasn't sure, But so I'm not going to say tzedakah is very, very important. But the idea that you have to give exactly a tenth is not so clear.
Right.
And I think that obviously we should definitely have in our mind that we should share our wealth like that.
Right.
But if you gave exactly a tenth, so totally, I think it's okay if some of it was your taxes and.
No, I just want to know that I'm good.
For sure you're good. For sure you're good.
Good. Thank you.
I'm just thinking my book of envelopes, we go through them, once a month or whatever.
I'm just gonna
but-
shut this off.
Okay,
Yeah.